Fortunately, जो panel है, I can see a little, it's going to be a little lopsided. I don't see government people here. So I think the real burden is going to be on Akbar Zaidi sir to create a balance and speak for the devil, no pun intended. Lekin, there is a genuine problem. I don't think it's Jinnah Institutes, and I personally see a sense of lack of ownership. Minister, to get him to talk on monetary policy, we're not getting any answers on that as well. So we'll try to find some answers today. Or I think format, what we can do is we can first give a round, let's say 2-3 minutes each. You have your views, and then we can sort of take it from there. We have a lot of time on our hands. Lekin, what the organizers have asked is 3-4 questions. One is, how can Pakistan enable growth while prioritizing stabilization? What major course corrections are needed in Pakistan's economic trajectory? Has the austerity drive brought about its desired results? How can financial inclusion for marginalized groups be brought about? Since the Treasury is not here, and I know a former Finance Minister Punjab is here, a formidable lady, former Commerce Minister is here, so maybe I can just sort of just jot down a few figures so they can start with a little explanation themselves. It's very easy to blame the present government. Not that the present government's financial team inspires much hope or confidence, but having said that, there are a few stats also which they've inherited. And the ladies and gentlemen sitting on my side are partially responsible for that. They were part of that government. The import-export gap, 2017-18, was $37.6 billion. It was the largest ever. The current accounts deficit, and this, when I was calculating, that is adding other inflows and outflows to merchandise trade flows, everything, it was 19 billion. Again, the largest ever. Gross external financing requirement was $27 billion, again highest ever. And the debt payments were set to rise sharply from 2018-19 onwards. Budget deficit had breached the 6.6% limit of GDP. That's 2.3 trillion rupees. So what we are also looking at is about a debt of about $135 billion to be paid back in the next 5 years. And 61 billion is going to just fall in the IMF program term. So this is what the present government inherited. So it's, while we are going to probably end up blasting the government for the next 2 hours or so, I think this is where we started. So the floor is open. Up, you want to start?
I'll start, no problem.
So let's start by first saying, okay, so let's first start by you just first trying to explain why you got us into this mess in the first place, and then we'll talk whether this government can take us out or not.
Thank you very much, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I want to thank the Jinnah Institute for inviting me here. The mess, well, you can take your pick. You can have, as we inherited in 2013 and faced, you can have a $18 billion current account deficit or 18 hours of load shedding. You pick. You can have 6 terrorist incidents per day, as we had in 2012, or we can have a budget deficit, whatever number that you have given us. The thing is that we never have ideal conditions in which to conduct economic policy, which is of course a very wide word, which includes not only the budgetary numbers, but how we attract investments, how we manage infrastructure, utilities. It's a very wide subject. But I'll begin, since we began, and we can then reach down to where we left. So the principal growth constraints, as we saw it in 2013, were, of course, the energy crisis and terrorism. And we thought that these were the two things that were holding Pakistan back. they were costing Pakistan anywhere, as experts tell us, 2 to 3% growth in GDP each year, which is another fantastic number if you think about it. So that's where we began, and as I said, one doesn't have the luxury of dealing with different aspects of economic performance serially. That, okay, today, for the next 2 months, we deal with the budget deficit. Everything has to be tackled simultaneously in parallel. So the energy crisis has to be dealt with, the budgetary crisis has to be dealt with, attracting investments have to be dealt with, exports that I was involved with, they have to be dealt with. And so by the end of it, yes, and again, in the interest of balance, since Malik Saab feels that this panel is very lopsided, he should have also told you, a very distinguished audience, that not only we leave a $18 billion current account deficit, but we also left the highest growth rate in 13 years. For the last 4 years of our government, inflation was less than 4%. If you look at the 2015-16 numbers, probably the lowest inflation in Pakistan's history, 2.8%. That's also our legacy. So the legacy cannot just be defined, and this is my submission before this distinguished audience, that, yes, some people would like to define our legacy by the current account deficit we left. I would like to say, okay, that's a part of the legacy, but the lowest inflation record, I think, which is brilliant, to have less than 4% inflation for 4 years, because when the people of Pakistan were asked in 2013 what were their principal issues, they ranked it inflation, unemployment, load shedding, terrorism. This was the ordering that we had. And, yes, there are certain aspects that were difficult that this government has had to tackle with. But look at what this government didn't have to tackle with. It didn't have to tackle with creating 14,000 megawatts of energy, because that had already been dealt with. It didn't have to fight another massive war on terrorism. And ladies and gentlemen, if you remember nothing else from the discussion we're having, please remember the wars cost money. Zarb-e-Azab wasn't fought for free. Neither was Rabb al-Fasad. So one of the issues of political economy were there in front of us. And the handy stick with which we are beaten, the current account deficit, was there because perhaps I think if there is one mistake that you could blame the PMLN government was, probably we tried to do too much in the period. We tried to grow too fast. But there are other aspects of the economy that we have to face. The issue is that let me rephrase it. The easy nostrums that we are fed have been proven wrong. Had they been correct, the nearly 50% devaluation that we have seen since May 2018 would have boosted exports massively. Instead, exports have been falling for the past 4 months. Even in the fiscal year of 2018-19, with this massive devaluation, the economic textbooks have something to answer for, because the exports in 2018-19 were less by nearly, not by much, by roughly $600 million, but still nonetheless less than the exports we had in 2017-18. So it's a complex endeavor. Of course, one has heard so much about so many aspects of what to prioritize, I made a sheet of all the silver bullets that at least I have been fed over the years. Infrastructure, okay, you focus on infrastructure, focus on human capital, you focus on financial liberalization, you focus on trade, you focus on institutions, urban development, green growth, innovation, fourth industrial revolution, development of entrepreneurship, all the bullets that I have been fed. None in isolation has done the trick.
Before I go to Dr. Pasha, I'm glad the minister mentioned energy. The investments in energy were one of the biggest boosters in the economic figures. And right now, we will come back to the energy once all the people have taken one round, because that is where the disaster has struck also. Our biggest financial woes are because of bad energy policies, and I'll also discuss them, how and where. And with figures coming from the World Bank also, the way those flawed policies favored people made by the previous governments. So we shall talk about energy in detail, because the power that they've talked about was absolutely overpriced, and a lot more was created than was necessary, and now we're paying through our nose. 600 billion, the whole thing has come down to. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of just two companies without naming them, how the profits have been rolling and how dollar indexation was done by their government when there was no logic in the payouts to be in dollar terms, when they should have been in rupee terms. And I'll also share the figures, how much money was made, and then we'll talk about that. But first, let's go to, and one more thing, just in a passing. I remember a gentleman called Ishaq Darsa. We got fined $20 million by IMF for fudging the figures. So maybe when we come back to you, Minister, you can tell us why, if everything was so good, why was the finance minister lying about it and lying to nationalist organizations? But in the meantime, Dr. Pasha, let's start with Punjab in particular. The new government is claiming you gave them a bankrupt province.
Like so many myths that we come across on a day-to-day basis, this is one of the few. In fact, false propaganda. I'll tell you this, and let me answer this specific question before I take the larger picture. See, in the way the constitution is structured, provinces are dependent on the federal government for transfers, which accounts for something like 78 to 95% of their total income, given the size of the province. In Punjab, it's the lowest, 78%. For Balochistan, it's 95%. So that is our legitimate income for the provinces, because that's the way the constitution is structured. Buoyant tax bases and broad-based tax bases are at the federal level. Now, the rightful share which is to come to the provinces make their budget on that basis, and they incur expenditures on their basis. They make their development projects on their basis. If the government, at the end of the fiscal year, federal government, decides to hold back that rightful share, revenues already accrued, sitting with the federal government, right of the provinces, but because they want to show in their books a bigger cash balance, they hold it back and they don't transfer their legitimate share to the provinces. What will happen? It's the share of the provinces. We have incurred expenditure on that basis, and then you didn't give us the income timely, and then you turn around and you say, you've incurred a deficit. This is wrong. This is exactly what was happened. Province of Punjab was due 87 billion from the federal government as its rightful share, and the deficit was 37 billion. So nowhere was province of Punjab left in deficit. Now, coming back to the overall larger picture of the economy, actually, Khurram Dastagir has already given a big picture of what the positives and what the negatives were. Let me talk more, not just for the government, but overall as an economist. Listen, see the ups and downs, the boosts and the busts that we see. This is something which is structural in Pakistan's economy. We have seen periods where the growth rate is high because someone from the external side was pumping money into Pakistan. We'll see it in the 60s, see it in the 80s, then see it in the new millennium with the Afghan war. When money is pumped into Pakistan, we see periods of growth. When that money dries away, we see periods of slump. It's a structural problem. We as a nation live beyond our means. It's not just one government. This has been systematically the case for many, many years. If I can to quote the last 20 years or so, our trade gap has been something like 7.5% of our gross domestic product. So it's not just PMLN 1 year that we are talking about. We should see it as a structural problem. Not one or two governments' headache. It's been what the Pakistan's economy has been structured to be. We need to correct it in a very substantial manner. And the way forward, of course, is that we need to get our act together and increase our incomes. For external side, we can't print dollars. We are dependent on export earnings. For that has to be given a boost. Exports, I think, should be the #1 priority, irrespective of who is in government and who is not contributing enough. Until and unless we sustainably increase our foreign exchange earnings, we will run into the deficit problem you have just mentioned initially. And then again, on the public finances side, we don't mobilize enough tax revenues, we end up spending them. This is a large nation. We are a country of 210 million people almost. So there are certain things that we should not attribute to just political parties, certain structural adjustments that have to take place, and we all should put our heads together, all political parties, all levels of government, all stakeholders in Pakistan, and fix them. And I don't know why we're not doing so. It's been 70 years. How many more do we need to be able to understand that this is something that we really should get our heads together for?
I'm just putting together a set of questions while you give your opening statements, and then we'll have a little discussion on that, and then we'll go to the floor also. Let's try to make some sense out of their economics and the new economics.
It's not surprising that no one from the PTI's economic team is willing to speak to you because they have nothing to say. There is nothing that they can say to make sense of the economic mess that has been created by the PTI government. For anyone who is looking for an excellent case study on how to wreck an economy in 1 year, turn to what Imran Khan's government has done over the last year. There are no two ways about it. You won't even find it in textbooks. And when economic historians and others look back on South Asia and other countries on, how not to treat an economy, they're going to turn to the first 11 and a half months of this government. Unfortunately, this government is in power for another 4 years, which means that we are going to see far more of what we've seen over the last year. So I think it's important to put in perspective what has actually happened over this last year, and then see where we are headed, what this year is going to bring, this financial year. There are no two ways about it. I think it's complete incompetence and hubris by Imran Khan, Asad Umar, and his team, which have brought us to where we are today. And we haven't even started the economic disaster that is about to take place over the next 6 to 9 months. And I think it's important to emphasize that. This is not an economic crisis. We can't call this an economic crisis. That's a cliche which we throw around all the time. This is a very critical juncture in Pakistan's economic history, and probably one of the most one of those critical moments. And we've had so many. We've had wars, we've had nuclear disasters, we've had everything around us. But as far as the economy is concerned, we're at a turning point, at a point which is going to define what happens to Pakistan. It's not Kashmir, it's not Afghanistan. They may play a role, but it's how the economy functions. So just a few very important statistics to put into perspective how wonderful the first year of the Imran Khan government has been. And I fear that they're in for another 4 years. First of all, at the end, just last week, we had figures about inflation in Pakistan. It's the highest in 5.5 years. And this is just the beginning. It's 10.3%. In 4 months, it's going to be 17%, 18%. It's just the beginning. The GDP growth, which Khurram Dastagir also spoke about, is the lowest in 9 years. It takes a lot of creativity to destroy an economy. And Imran Khan gets a lot of credit for that. Asad Umar gets a lot of credit for that. It's their hubris. We won't go to the IMF. We will commit suicide. I wish they had collectively. It would have solved a lot of problems. They haven't. and that's why we have to suffer more. The 9-year low GDP, and it, from 5.8% to 2.8%, if you, as an economist, as somebody who teaches economics, I give you full marks. You get an A+ for that. And next year, this financial year, it's going to fall to 2.4%. Next year, perhaps even lower. This is just the beginning. The per capita of income of Pakistan has fallen by 9% in 1 year. The Imran Khan first year of government, from $1,650 to $1,515. Bangladesh now has a higher per capita income than Pakistan does, and it's going to grow. And next year, next financial year, the per capita income in Pakistan is going to be even lower. I mean, the foreign direct investment has fallen by 50%. CPEC is over, it's done. It's something we don't talk about. And there are political reasons for that, there are Imran Khan reasons for that. But CPEC is now, if you see yesterday's newspaper, the headline is that we can't build a railway line according to the CPEC plan because the IMF has got certain agreements. We have signed our death warrant with the IMF only on account of not looking at how and when to make certain decisions. There is a problem of sequencing. There's a problem of how one deals with the IMF, when one deals with the IMF. I think it was fairly certain that had Nawaz Sharif's government, the PMLN won, which they should have, had we had fair elections, then they would have gone to the IMF in August 19, 20th, they would have been there. There's a lot of difference when you go to the IMF in March, April, and May, and say we don't need you and we'll do whatever we want. And now they have given in, lost their sovereignty, lost their independence. There is no economic model, alternative model to the IMF. So we know exactly what's going to happen. You pick up the IMF document, it will tell you that by June next year, the dollar-rupee rate is going to be 188.75. You look at the interest rate, it's already 13.75%. It's probably going to go a bit higher. In this environment, and the funny thing is, the IMF is supposed to be the house with economists, and Aisha and I, we look at economics, and they'll tell you that when your GDP rate is falling to 2.8%, you cannot expect revenues to be 5.5 trillion. Revenues and taxation, as anybody ought to know, that they are based on how the economy functions. So they've hit the highest revenue target, 5.5 trillion rupees, an increase of a ridiculous 43% over the last year, at a time when your economy is halved. So I'll stop there and say that we are at a point where the fun hasn't even started. It's about to hit the ceiling, and it's going to spread all over. Thank you.
It's going to be a very tough task for me because the way this stage is now set, literally speaking, I have to speak on behalf of the government. And every week I blast them on economy and all these issues. But I'll pretend to be another man for the next 40, 45 minutes because someone has to speak for the governing any other version. But when we come back, I still want to come back to the initial figures that I quoted. It's very easy to blast the government. What do you do when you're saddled with spiraling debts, with rather fudged figures, where you're caught lying to international organizations also, where necessarily all the figures? Then I was just going through the Auditor General's report a few days back. 85% of all irregularities by the outgoing government were done in the last 1 year. And that was election year. So here's a picture of a government that was throwing all law, all regulation to the wind and making all attempts to win the elections and fudge all the figures and do things. These are not some things we can just shrug away saying that the new team is incompetent. New team has inherited a very bad sheet. So somebody has to answer. It's very easy to say they're not doing this. What were all the earlier smart people doing if the economy that we got in 2019 was in such a mess? We'll come back to that and like some answers back. Harun Sahib, you've been an insider to the new government. We left. Some of us know why you left. But right now, let's stick to the economy. And maybe you'll do a partial defense. Maybe things went bad somewhere.
Well, thank you very much, Malik, and thank you to Jinnah Institute for inviting me, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I think we have basically looked at my fellow distinguished panelists, lots of numbers, lots of trends, political economy issues, IMF. I would like to basically begin with two things. We need to look at Pakistan in a little bit of serious regional context. What's happening at the moment is that South Asia is showing the highest growth actually region in the world. It's almost for the past 5 years in the range of 6.8 to 7%. Who is leading this growth? It is India, of course, 7%. Bangladesh catching up 7.1%. Sri Lanka picking up. The only country which is going down at the moment is Pakistan. So this is something which is linked than that. If you are bargaining power within the region, we need to see with weaknesses in the economic structure, where would you stand in the next few years? Couple of numbers, since we are talking about economy. Pakistan remains, and that has been highlighted. Look, economics for past 200 years have not changed. We keep on trying to bypass the basics of economics. We need, exports have been mentioned. Yes, there is no way out. But, basically why we can't do it. We keep on, one government comes and Khurram Dastagir Sahab and I have, endlessly debated that when I was coming from the other side. The issue at the moment, which I see, Malik, couple of things I will put on table and then I'll finish. The political ideology, first of all, I struggle to see getting into, developing a real evidence-based policy for growth. Most of the leadership actually thought that growth was projects. So whenever I started debate, either with the PPP government or PML government or even the PTI government, I think the political incentive is to show quick returns, and that gives you by a project. It could be infrastructure. It could be cash transfers. It could be now, the ESAS program or housing programs. The point I'm trying to make is that other countries have actually managed to do very clear growth policies which are articulated, which are evidence-based and shared with people. So that's point number one, where in a vacuum, I was operating trying to attract investors in a policy vacuum. So this is what, I'm trying to highlight as point number one. Second point for Pakistan is that we know our binding constraints which are structural in nature. Umpteenth time we have analyzed and looked at numbers. I don't think we don't know analytically what the problem is. The largest and the biggest binding constraint which I find in Pakistan to deal with the issues which Akbar has highlighted and other is the capability issue. So I would highlight the capability issue at the policy level, at the bureaucracy level, at the coordination level, and even in the private sector level. So if I look at the World Economic Forum numbers of Pakistan's capability of planning, implementation, dispute resolution, there are 22 indicators of capability. Pakistan falls way below our peers in terms of capability to deal with the. I will not try to get into the defense of the government or any government. Like in last comment, unless and until you rise above the tried and tested people and instruments and bring in quality of expertise, I don't think any country will be able to deal with the issues which are discussed.
Thank you, Alam. So we'll try to find, in this round, we'll try to find some solutions to proactively what needs to be done. But like we talk about capacity issue, I'd just like to point out very interesting something. There's not a single PhD in finance, in economics in the entire finance ministry. And there's one gentleman who's been dealing with the debt preparation and all that for the last 9 or 10 years. His house in finance ministry and the salary is being paid by EU. And he's actually making the documentation for our debt projections and everything. And he's paid by the European Union. He's not even paid by the Pakistan government. So that's a very interesting I don't know whether you call it Trojan or whatever you may want to call it.
Others funded by other agencies as well, so not
But
only
there
one.
are a couple of things, just very quick, from Khurram Saab se shuru kar dete hain, since he brought up energy. Because energy is a serious mess, and it's probably the biggest scandal in Pakistan's history also, and worth hundreds of billions of rupees a year that we are facing, and it's caused a real distortion also. We talked about investments and all. I have this report of, this is the state of Pakistan economy, State Bank of Pakistan ki hai, and then it talks about the overcapacity, underutilization, wrong growth projections, and it's a crazy story. Agar aap kahin to, I'll share the figures later. Lekin, there's no justification for, yes, there was a shortage, there was everything. Two questions very quickly, Khurram Saab. Ek to overcapacity generation was installed on very juicy contracts. 2004, 94, pehla jab round aaya, so you could understand the payouts being in dollar terms. There were foreign companies, foreign investors and everything. The second round of investment came in IPPs. They were all local businessmen, local business houses, local loans, locals, everything. So logic dictated that their payouts and everything should be in rupee denomination. Then for some strange reason in 2015, your government changed that payout again to dollars. And absolutely without any justification. Fully aware of the fact that in our country, in our third world economy, hamare dollars has always been, fluctuation is always there. That added another 5 to 7% of profit margins to the things. Companies that were guaranteed up to 14 to 17% profits contractually were making 30%, 32% thing. Without naming a company, I'll just give you one example. The company was a IPP. They showed an equity of $42 million. Now, even if we took that equity at face value, and there was no padding and nothing, we all know paddings were 30 to 40%, old plants were there, but that's a different debate. The first year earning was $28 million. Second year earning was $18 million. And the contract is for 15 years. Then you set up LNG terminals. I have this letter that just written by Sri Northern Gas on 2nd August to the government saying, we are busting at seams because the LNG is not being, we have more than we can handle, we're going to have a problem and blah, blah, blah. And the government has put in motion a third terminal also. And if we go into the details of how the first terminal was awarded, how the second, that makes a whole different plethora, and it will take us away from this debate. But energy crisis that you solved, you created double the size of that crisis in terms, and the price is being paid by the Pakistan people today and the economy. So where do you want to start?
I will want to start that countries, developing countries, do get into these cash flow issues. They grow out of them. If Pakistan had grown even at 5.8%, or as we had foreseen had we won the election, or being allowed to win the election, it would have been 6%, and the scenario would be entirely different. Pakistan would be in much better position to deal with these issues, fiscally also. Let me remind that one of the things that needs to be kept in everyone's foreground is that while we were keeping inflation low and increasing growth rate, between 2013 and 18, we doubled FBR revenues from 1,900 billion to 3,840 billion in 2018, which incidentally, just like exports, this government failed to reach this year. Their FBR revenue was 3,804 billion rupees with all this massive inflation that occurred. So yes, I unfortunately can't help you there since I was part of that energy team. What I can do say, and of course one gets this criticism,
You were a member,
my
of the,
mind,
you were a member of the cabinet.
I was a member of the cabinet, but I don't
The
know
cabinet approved that.
yes, cabinet approved
So
that.
cabinet members don't read what's given to them?
We do, but the reasons, the full reasons for how these decisions were reached, I'm not privy to them. But as I see it, and as PML government saw it, infrastructure, and I include the energy infrastructure in that, has to be by necessity anticipatory. You can't have that, okay, we have 200 more megawatts are needed, let's put it. And by that time, the energy. So you have to create more than you need now. Because the country is growing, the population is growing. So just like other infrastructure, the energy infrastructure has to be anticipatory. Otherwise, you're always playing catch up and losing valuable growth percentages, which each year would run into hundreds of billions of rupees, even thousands of billions of rupees. So that's, yes, as I said, if there's one thing that PMLN can be blamed for, it is that we tried to do too much, perhaps in our 5 years. We tried to resolve these issues, what we thought was, for a further 10 years. So yes, maybe, now in the fullness of days and with the calm of mind, all passions spent, we can say, maybe perhaps we didn't need the second LNG terminal. But when the province of Punjab particularly, because it has a concentration of industry and population, was practically starved of natural gas for months on end. All factories, houses, we didn't have gas. So what do you do? So yes, as I said, maybe in calm of mind, now you can say, okay, maybe you shouldn't have done that much, maybe that was too much. But as I said, we made our projections for a growing Pakistan. We didn't make our projections for a contracting Pakistan in which the growth rate would contract, in which the demand would contract, the whole thing would contract. Because as I said, the growth rate, though not a panacea for all ills, does resolve many of the issues. Had our revenues been rising, we've been 20% rise in revenues each year during PMLN. Had the revenues been rising by 20%, you will have another 700, 600 billion this year, but we didn't. So it's an issue. So yes, we can debate the minutiae of how policy was reached. Yes, maybe some people might have benefited from it. But as I said, and this is my last sentence on this, please remember, in 2013 and 2014, no Western investors, no Pakistani investors was willing to touch Pakistan with a barge pole. They were not willing to come. It was only after, in 2015, that the CPEC was signed in April 15, that this sense was created that yes, maybe Pakistan is beginning to grow again. So maybe we made mistakes. But one of the mistakes is that perhaps this bulb is now on.
मैं ज़ैदी साहब पे आता हूँ, लेकिन I just want to put one thing on record, कि it's not a mistake. It's a blunder of proportion running into tens of billions, because even the figures that are with me, you were so busy in handing out juicy contracts, you forgot that the power that you generate has to be transmitted also. Where was the investment made by the government in transmission? And if we see at the figures, even under the best of circumstances, you cannot add more than 9 to 10% of extra power because you don't have the delivery systems. So you were busy setting up all these IPPs who were, in fact, I would request Jinnah Institute to have a separate one entire day on energy itself, and that is the day people realize how it has been scammed. I don't want to go into
And they said that the shortfall in Pakistan's GDP growth was 2 to 3% because of the energy crisis. So, the terms may not be right, and I think Khurram Dastagir is absolutely right in saying this, that the growth rate that took place in Pakistan, 5.8% year before last, was on account of the energy generation. There's no question about that. And what is even more surprising is that with an uninterrupted supply of energy, the Imran Khan government has brought our growth rate down to 2.8%. So if you, going back, if we didn't have the energy, our growth rate this last year would have been 0.3%. So now he's also right about saying that there are two issues here. One is that the price may be high, and had the economy been growing, you generate taxes from these places. You're right that there's a very serious problem in distribution, in costing, and in other issues about the power sector. But I think had the economy been growing, you collect the taxation, you collect revenue from it. But the second more important point is, and where this government can do something, if they can do one thing at all, is to transfer the indirect taxes from the electricity tariffs to direct taxation. They talk a lot about corruption, which essentially means political victimization in Pakistan. But if they're very serious about corruption and they want to do something about the taxation structure, they have to move towards a very drastic reform and raise direct taxes, those who have wealth, assets, and property. 20 billion in the stock market is ridiculous. Hafiz Sheikh wanted to do that. Fortunately, the IMF has said no. IMF has said no. For one thing, they've done something right. But so this idea. So there are two issues here. One, energy has to be provided. Without that, you won't even hit 2.2% in growth rate. Second, the energy tariffs are high, and they're going to rise next month again. And every 4 months they're going to rise again if you look at the IMF agreement. But that's not the way, that's not the solution. You transfer taxes to direct taxes, and you can lower the tariffs on energy. So the issues that you're raising are now side issues. I don't think they're the central issues anymore.
Just to add, because we're talking about this energy, one more statistics to give you. If we hadn't provided this energy, we're talking about the cost. Let me give you as an economist the concept of opportunity cost. If we hadn't provided this energy, the cost per kilowatt hour to this economy would have been 34 rupees of revenue, of economic activity lost. So when you're making these decisions, they may not be so smooth, and given the fact that no one was really coming and investing, we were begging and with our bowls with the energy situation, the security situation, even the Pakistani investors were not coming in.
Yeah.
And give us also credit for the fact that we diversified, the last government diversified the fuel based of energy, which was so essential for the economy. Increasing the generation, improving the fuel base of the energy, very important. Yes, we could have gone in for more transmission and distribution. But also let me tell you that what has been happening in the last 10 months, that there has been generation we took care of. This government has not even been able to do so, and we know that the transmission distribution losses are close to 19%. Short of the inefficient plants, which are yielding just 23, 24%. Come on and improve the utilization of the new plants. This is energy management, which they have failed to do.
Let's come back to the economy. Okay, I don't want the issue to go to energy. It's a whole new subject. I have a lot of answers for what you guys have just pointed
it's a
out.
separate point. I think it's important. What we are talking about, the cost of doing business and the energy and importance. I think there are three things which I would like to highlight. The focus was on generation, as it has been said. But it still takes 120 days for one business to take energy connection, okay? As compared to 5 days average of Asia. When I started looking at, I was told in BOI that we need to make 9 new economic zones. I started analyzing the existing 7. Some of us will be surprised. Only 15% of energy and gas is being provided to the existing 7 zones. So my question is that what is the benefit of
of their requirement?
No, out of like 100% requirement, says 15% has been provided. So they are not getting gas, they're not getting energy. So how would you run? So you are trying to make more. So I put my foot down and I said, let's fix the 7 first. And I obviously, received lots of opposition because people like to do new projects. Final point is that we had very clear offers from the countries in Asia, other than China, to actually invest very serious amount in renewable energy. Very serious amount. Pakistan, I confess, in 1 year, I could not persuade the Ministry of Energy to come up with alternate energy policy. We still don't have it. Previous government did not have it. Now the question is that why should somebody look at investing? जो मैं आपसे vacuum की बात कर रहा हूँ और capability की. Khurram Saab's government did, the priority was right, but you kept on using the people, again, without, any disrespect to our generalists and bureaucracy, to deliver. Now, that is where the planning failure occurs once you keep on putting, more water in a leaky bucket. So I think these are the issues for businesses. Okay, cost is high, but it's not been provided. So that's what I'm trying to highlight.
Let's have a quick round of solutions and then we'll go to the audience. Like where we stand today, the discount rate is 13.25, add 1% TIBOR, add the banking spread, and depending on the size of business, your markup is anywhere from 16 to 19%, which is impossible to bear for small and medium enterprises in particular. The government is claiming there has been a credit expansion, but then the State Bank also concedes that most of the credit that the private businesses are taking now is not into BMR, it's not into new projects, it's actually taking care of their other financial balance of books, either say working capital liya or दूसरे अपने loans markups को adjust किया and all those things. So that money really isn't going into business, but just trying to balance books and trying to stay above the water. Energy costs have quadrupled. There have been serious now taxation measures in place. And like they said, it's a front-loaded IMF program, things that all the steps should have been taken, but the debate is whether they should have been staggered over 3 years, or the entire medicine for 1 year is being fed to the patient in 1 week, and you know the consequences. But this is the backdrop we are in. How, if you were in government today, all 4 of you, I'd like quick, 2 minutes each, what would you do? Or what could you do? Khurram, I'll start.
The first thing
besides resigning.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. But of course, there's this old formula of what was used to be called Washington Consensus, or the IMF formula of stabilize, liberalize, privatize. I would focus on the liberalize and the privatize part, which is again, nothing is easy in economic policy.
Which you guys didn't do in 5 years.
Which we didn't do, that's the truth. Because remember, we were in an IMF program between 2013 and 16, which finished in September 16, less than 2 years away from the election itself. And probably the only program in living memory which was completed at least, if not successfully, some would argue, but it was completed. And so yes, the liberalization part, that's my personal prejudice in economic policy. The privatized part, I think, is very important. But something that Harun Saab is saying, because he and I have been having this argument about cost of doing business issues, is that one of the most important things to think about is the protection of property rights and contract enforcement, particularly when it comes to attracting foreign investment. It's a massive issue, which is not in the realm of economic policy per se, but how we deal with in our justice system, how our courts are structured, because we have failed at that, whether it be the Reko Dick case, which is now, at least until it is appealed, as large as the IMF program, unfortunately. So that would be something that we would focus at. Again, this ease of doing business, of dashing heads together of provincial and federal government. And sir, it cost PML government blood, sweat and tears to get this light burning. Yeah, it's history now. It's something that we take for given. But for us, I think it was a big deal. It used to be. It's no longer is. Maybe that's a good thing. That's one of the better legacies to leave to for future
You might
generations.
have shed tears,
But-
but Iqbals and Emmons of the world are
I
really
mean,
smiling their way to a bank.
they're always there. Someone is going to make money. The final part is, and I want to, and it's nothing to do with economic policy, because the economists that I've read, the small part that I've read, are unanimous on political stability as a prerequisite to economic growth. This is something that we have not had. PMLN had a ticking time bomb since August 2014 when the first dharna started, and since then we were on the clock. We didn't know when we were leaving or when the government will be taken away from us. I hope the PTI government does better on this account, so they can have the luxury of not having a gun to their temples and specific measures
What would you do? Let's
to
say
start
five
these issues. I mean, the ease of doing business, as I said, Harun Sahib and I, we've been bashing our heads together on this. This will require systematic effort over years to sensitize provincial governments, WAPDA, the distribution companies to start facilitating business. It will require years for our revenue departments in our districts, which we all know the whole Kanu Go Patwari thing, is to start facilitating business. So these are the things that once you have this sense that you have a government for a few years hence, you will be able to do these reforms. So ease of doing business, liberalization, and political stability is my formula.
I will, just a correction before I go on. Just a small correction. There has been an improvement in our ease of doing business ranking very recently by 11 points. So it's not that the PML and the government didn't do this, and I'm talking to you personally because Punjab in Lahore and Karachi is where they get this ranking from, and we did a lot of work in Punjab. Now coming to your question, is what's need to be done. I'll give you four very specific measures to be done immediately, and 5 measures which are more in the nature of a startup now, and they'll bear fruit in the medium to long run. First of all, the increase in interest rate is killing your economy. You have overdone it, you have overshot it, and this is wrong recipe. When you increase interest rate by 1%, your investments go down by 0.8%. This is all that is happening. Pakistan doesn't have consumer credit. So you do not reduce aggregate demand by increasing interest. What you do is you can investment and you make your domestic debt very, very costly. Now you were talking about debt servicing. Let me give you a figure. Because of the last 10 months wrong policy, debt servicing cost the increase that we have seen, 70% is because of wrong debt policy. One, they increased the cost of domestic debt by increasing the policy rate. Second, they overdid devaluation. And why am I saying they overdid devaluation? That's the second point. We should not have gone in for so much devaluation. At one stage, I agree our currency was overvalued. But that threshold will cross some time back. You have overdone this, and according to the State Bank of Pakistan, they have used the new methodology by changing weights and including more currencies in it. At this point of time, your currency is undervalued by 10%. You've overdone it. And not only have you overdone it, you have increased the cost of external debt. And this is criminal. So please, any government who turns around and says we have heavy cost of debt servicing, well, you increased it by 70% yourself in the last 10 months. So you have to pay for it. It's not the previous government's debt, it's your bad management. That's the thing you need to do. Correct your real effective interest rate. It should be linked to that. And you need to do this. That's the second.
What do you think what should have been the interest rate?
It is 10% overvalued
And
according to
State Bank.
State Bank.
What do you think is the real value of the rupee right now?
Yes, it is 10% undervalued.
Rupees are 10% undervalued.
This is as per State Bank of Pakistan, no one's individual calculation. So they have overdone it. That's the second thing.
So you're looking at about 150 rupees
Yes,
for you as a fair value.
10% yes.
Yeah, but
10%
150
yes.
rupees. Okay.
The third thing that, see, the problem is that we are using exchange rate to curtail imports. This is stupid. No one uses exchange rate to crush imports. There are other mechanisms available. And devaluation increases inflation. Every 1% devaluation leads to, 1 rupee change leads to 0.4% increase in inflation. So this is wrong strategy to be done correctly. Third thing that I would ask them to do is to stop harassing the informal economy. Informal economy has been the cushion for poverty in Pakistan. What they have now started doing in the name of increasing tax rate is killing the informal economy also, crushing them totally. You want more revenues, you increase growth rate, as the point Akbar was making. You want more revenues, you tap the highest growth rate, the big taxpayers who are evading taxes. You haven't done enough. And this is all nonsense when we turn around and make the slogan that there are 1.7 million income taxpayers in this country. This is all nonsense. I'll tell you, there are 150 million mobile phone users in this country who are paying income taxes because you have income tax levied in your phone bill. And these are people who are beyond your income tax exemption limit. You really shouldn't be taxing them at all. They're poor people, and you're collecting income taxes from them. You're collecting income taxes from people who have bank accounts. They're again 15 million or more. So stop this nonsense of telling the world that we don't have people paying income taxes in Pakistan. We are all paying. It's the bigger ones you're unable to catch because you have given plethora of exemptions to them. And at this point of time, according to the economic survey, the exemption limits is costing us ₹1 trillion a year. Look at them. Catch tax evasion, reduce corruption. Current expenditure is increasing by 40% in the next budget. If you want austerity, reduce it. So these are things that you can do immediately. Things that need to be done in the medium run, revive the economy through giving a push to agriculture and SMEs. These are areas where employment is generated. These are areas through which growth takes place. These are areas in which your growth can be broad-based and can really stop the suffocation of the economy that is currently taking place. Second, have an effective state-owned enterprises strategy. What is it that you need to do with these state-owned enterprises where the cumulative loss at this stage is 1.3 trillion? 1.6 trillion. And what are we doing about these? We're talking about austerity. We're saying, oh God, in the American trip, the Prime Minister didn't stay in a hotel and saved so many rupees. Here we are talking about 1.3 trillion losses. Come on, get our act together, make it more effective. Right sizing of government is another area. We've been talking about right governance, everything. Have you seen any effort of late of right sizing? And lastly, please do not mess around with 18th Amendment. We need to make a governance structure more accountable. Governance at the doorstep makes it more accountable. Do not mess up with the 18th Amendment. There is already too much talk about it. And it makes me very upset because it will, this whole federal government theory that because of the NFC award, going to the provincial governments, we are incurring this kind of a big, huge federal deficit. Let me give you some facts and figures. The increase in federal budget deficit, only 1/3 of it is because of an increase in NFC transfers to the provinces. 2/3 of it, you've made your mess yourself. Get your act together. Do not blame the provinces. They are responsible for some very basic services in this country. Health, education, public transport, agriculture, SMEs. These are the things which may affect the quality of life of ordinary Pakistanis. Do not suffocate them. Let them spend. And do not impose these conditionalities of please generate your cash transfers so that we can show in our books that we are not incurring a deficit or we are reducing our deficit. These are few things that we really, really need to push forward if we want to attain some kind of growth momentum and improve some kind of quality of life in this country.
Before moving, Dr. Zaidi, I'd just like Dr. Pasha's passion is infectious, I'd just like to be the bad guy in the room and point out a few things. I love your passion, especially of state-owned enterprises. During your government, 24 of the biggest state-owned corporations did not have a CEO for over 3.5 years. You did not appoint chief operating officers on permanent basis. In 18 of them, the boards were changed more than thrice with ad hoc changes. As 1.6 trillion that we're talking about today was a carryover from bad policies of your government. You talked about the rupees real value as being undervalued 10 rupees, 10%. Darsab kept it at 105, 108, and the CS charge how many billions he spent keeping this artificial bubble alive. So when you look at those billions, when you look at this 1.6 trillion, and when you look at all these things, it is not something that has happened overnight. So I wish all these passions were there when you were members of the cabinet also and arguing with your leaders and telling them to do the right thing.
When I was at the provincial government and we are accused of appointing too many CEOs, if you remember.
Too many.
Too many. Because
Frequently,
of the,
nobody was around so long.
on various things. See, we are talking here as economists looking forward. Let's stop this, what we didn't do and what we did. We take the blame.
The future is rooted in the past.
Listen.
You have to analyze
Yes, we
it.
have to take
You can't just say.
And believe me, I was one of the people who was saying that yes, under
खुर्रम ने आजकल एक
overvaluation.
खुर्रम ने आजकल एक नई फ्रेज बड़ी पॉपुलर की भी है, पीछे देखो, पीछे देखो.
नहीं, पीछे तो हम देखेंगे. मगर what I'm trying to say is that, see, we have made some mistakes. We did a lot of good. We made some mistakes. Major. Oh, okay, you call them major. Okay, there are many other major mistakes. What I'm saying is that what we couldn't do at that stage, the new government should come forward. We have started now. Instead of just looking back and saying you didn't do this, let's just say that we're talking about 210 million Pakistanis. Let's think about them and move forward collectively. In fact, this whole thing about the Charter of the Economy has now become a laughing ground. I feel personally hurt. I'll tell you why. Because we need to make economic policy beyond politics in this country if we have to bring structural changes which are needed. On it, do it. We lost it. We lost the opportunity.
Thank you.
एक सवाल भी है.
Yeah.
लेकिन उससे पहले again I'm sorry I'm the bad guy. I have to correct you. Charter of Economy was your party president Mariam Nawaz herself. Even before she herself shot down और said कि मजाक मेशत छोड़े और दूसरी बात करें. So even before the government shot it down, your own party leadership shot it down.
It was used as an
I'll have to correct my dear brother Malik on this. The Charter Economy was offered, sir, in August 2018. The shooting down you talk about is May 2019. Is May 2019. So there was this period. No. No. We have to think about. We have to correct dates.
I'm talking about when.
I'm talking about
when
the government had full.
Offered it on the floor
Government
of the House
had
in
full
the Parliament.
9 months, sir, to take up the offer, but they didn't take it up.
So we can discuss it. Zali Saab, she pointed out, Dr. Pasha pointed out, SMEs in particular. I was talking to the head of the SME Association the other day in one of my programs, and they had a very legitimate demand. They said, it's a circumstance, I mean, SMEs are roughly approximately attributed to 90% employment is coming through SMEs. And they were saying we would need, under the present circumstances, special credit lines should be there for us. And the government seriousness can be gauged even from the fact that SMEDA does not have a head for the last 1 year. So that is the present government's priority and unfortunately the SMEs, small medium enterprises, are not as organized as Aptama or Cement Group or the sugar industry. So they really don't have a voice. They're small and medium, these are the backbones. So Zarisa, we can start from there and then
I'll come to that later because I have a couple of, you're asking solutions from a government which has wrecked an economy. So it's kind of difficult to be, पहले बर्बाद करो फिर को अच्छा कुछ ठीक करें. It's kind of difficult. But I think one thing we have to understand and recognize, no matter what anybody else says, is that we have a 3-year IMF program. That is our economic policy. Just forget about everything else. You read through the document, line by line by line, it will tell you what, when, and why. Okay, this has to be done. Electricity tariffs will go up on the 17th of September of this year. Aap dekh lijiyega. Dikha hua hai. The depreciation of the rupee will be whatever it will be. You have an economic straitjacket, you have an economic program. You don't need a finance minister, you don't need the state bank governor, because you have the IMF resident representative